Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we witnessed Rimuru's sudden appearance and his miraculous intervention in neutralizing Milim's ultimate attack, Drago Nova. Diablo also received a portion of Rimuru's slime cells, successfully restoring his grievously damaged body. In this episode, Milim will regain her sanity, Diablo will drive back Feldway, and Ivarage will undergo further evolution. So, let's get started. As Rimuru continued calling out to Milim, he began assessing the current situation. It appeared that Milim was responding to the voices of Rimuru, Veldora, and Gaia, with Gaia eliciting the strongest reaction. Although there were no clear signs of her regaining self-awareness, at least the direction had emerged. To exert a more effective influence on Milim's consciousness, Rimuru needed a method that could stimulate her more profoundly. Utilizing Argos, the Eye of God, he projected the ongoing battle in Eurasania before her eyes. What appeared was an unexpected sight. Every individual frozen by Velzard had returned to life. Frey stood out in the sky, making her position easily noticeable. Rimuru quickly spotted Testarossa, Carrera, Sauka, Gabiru, and even Rain among the battlefield. He couldn't help but wonder how they managed to break free from Velzard's ice. Since it didn't seem like Velzard had actively undone it, he found it hard to believe that even he could have accomplished such a feat. However, Seal immediately countered, insisting that Rimuru-sama certainly could do it. Rimuru, ever skeptical of Seal's tendency to be overly competitive, set his doubts aside and connected with Testarossa. Overjoyed to hear that Rimuru-sama had safely returned, Testarossa expressed immense relief. Naturally, Rimuru understood everyone's concern. After all, getting caught in Feldway's trap had made it seem like he would never return. However, it wasn't Rimuru's fault. If blame were to be assigned, it would rest solely on Feldway. Rimuru inwardly resolved to make Feldway pay for what he had done. Testarossa swiftly summarized the state of the battlefield. As expected, the conclusion remained unchanged. This was yet another of Feldway's elaborate schemes. Rimuru's anger toward Feldway intensified. Still, there was some good news. Thus far, there hadn't been any casualties. One problem at a time. The most urgent issue was restoring Milim's rationality. Rimuru continuously called out to her, letting her know that all their comrades were safe and that her continued rampage would only bring sorrow upon them. He even threw in some taunting remarks. Gaia, too, echoed Rimuru's calls. Their combined efforts yielded an unexpected result. At first, Milim showed no clear response. But then, all of a sudden, she murmured something absurd, wondering if, as long as Rimuru didn't broadcast her reckless behavior, she could somehow shift the blame onto him and escape responsibility. Rimuru was just about to retort at her naivete when he suddenly realized, without even noticing it herself, Milim had regained her sanity. That was all it took. Even Rimuru found it hard to believe. Milim's hostility dissipated in an instant, and with it, her stampede form vanished. Her sakura gold hair returned to its natural luster, a crimson horn protruded from her forehead, and rationality shone once again in her dragonic eyes. The enormous wings on her back unfurled, and her body, clad in pitch-black armor, stood unharmed. Chloe, Leon, Elmesia, and the others stared in astonishment. The crisis that once seemed impossible to resolve had ended in the blink of an eye. Moments ago, they had been contemplating how to subdue Milim. Now, it no longer mattered. Whether it was because of the battle projection proving that everyone was safe or Gaia's persistent calls awakening something deep within her, the outcome remained the same. The chaos ended in a single moment. Milim had returned to normal, and relief washed over everyone present. The moment Rimuru confirmed Milim's recovery, he scolded her for the reckless rampage, unwilling to simply let her off the hook without at least apologizing for causing trouble. Veldora, ever easygoing, casually suggested that since he had worked so hard to prevent the disaster from spreading, perhaps Rimuru should just let Milim off the hook. Chloe remained silent, while Elmesia stepped in, stating that since Milim had been controlled, it didn't seem fair to hold her responsible. Given Elmisia's typically serious demeanor, her decision not to pursue the matter made it difficult for Rimuru to continue arguing. Milim, deeply grateful, enthusiastically praised Elmisia, though Rimuru suspected that Elmisia wasn't that easily swayed. Sure enough, Elmisia immediately followed up by bringing up Sarian's reconstruction, suggesting that they discuss it later, and that Rimuru would need to help with the rebuilding efforts. Rimuru was stunned. Why was this his responsibility? Clearly, Milim was the one who caused the destruction. But Elmisia insisted, since Rimuru was Milim's guardian, it was only natural that he be the one to assist in the reconstruction. Rimuru begrudgingly accepted the reality of the situation. Milim's recovery brought a wave of relief, but while Feldway was furious, he remained preoccupied with Diablo and couldn't act. Chloe and Veldora, now exhausted, descended onto the divine tree's leaves. However, Veldora suddenly remarked that Milim had also caused quite a ruckus over at the Heaven Tower and that a particularly troublesome individual had appeared on that battlefield. Rimuru then shifted his focus toward the Heaven Tower. Milim immediately denied any wrongdoing, but everyone unanimously assumed otherwise. Elmisia revealed that Milim had unleashed a Drago Nova there as well. Milim, flustered, tried to make excuses but failed to talk her way out of it. The facts were undeniable. Rimuru activated Argos to observe the battlefield and found that the world's greatest warriors were already engaged in fierce combat against the invading cryptid army. Elmisia glared at Feldway, denouncing him as a lunatic with a delusional dream of destroying the world and holding him entirely responsible for Milim's rampage. Rimuru wasn't surprised by how things had unfolded. After all, during his absence, Feldway had surely done as he pleased. Fortunately, thanks to Luminous leadership, the world had managed to unite against the threat, preventing total annihilation. For now, Rimuru resolved to settle the score with the one who had caused all this devastation, Feldway. At that moment, Sylvia joined the conversation. She agreed that defeating Feldway was important, but she pointed out something peculiar. Feldway bore an uncanny resemblance to the Star King Dragon, Beldanava, with the only major difference being his hair color. Rimuru hadn't initially grasped the implication of Sylvia's words. However, when he glanced at Milim, a realization struck him: Beldanava was Milim's father. Milim, too, was baffled, admitting that she had no memories of her father, so beating Feldway to a pulp wasn't a problem for her. Rimuru decided that after defeating Feldway, he would go to support Guy, while Milim would head to the Heaven Tower to aid their allies. Milim initially wanted to assist in Guy's battle instead, but Rimuru assured her that her subordinates were already safe. What mattered now was proving her worth and erasing any resentment held against her. Veldora also declared that he would accompany Milim and assist in the fight. Rimuru advised Veldora to be careful. Veldgrind seemed extremely tense. But rather than just being nervous, it felt as though she was warily keeping an eye on someone. Seal confirmed that Veldgrind's gaze was fixed on a peculiarly out-of-place child, sitting atop a massive beast, leisurely swinging his legs. That child was none other than the evil god Ivarage. Rimuru couldn't shake the eerie, unsettling feeling that emanated from him. Still, he believed that Milim and Veldora would be able to handle the situation. Meanwhile, Rimuru turned his attention back to Diablo, preparing to help him against Feldway. However, it was only then that Rimuru realized just how unnecessary that thought had been, because at that very moment, Diablo was overwhelming Feldway, forcing him into a desperate corner. Their final confrontation had already begun. From Feldway's perspective, the moment he released control over Milim, she had fired Drago Nova, only for Rimuru to suddenly appear and somehow neutralize its devastating power. Rimuru's unexpected return was entirely outside of Feldway's calculations, sending an ominous sense of unease through him, as though if he continued allowing things to unfold, the consequences would spiral beyond his control. However, with Diablo standing in his way, he found himself temporarily unable to interrupt what was happening. As he hesitated, Rimuru abruptly hurled some dangerous object toward Diablo. Feldway instinctively tried to intervene, but it was already too late. The object was not thrown, it was delivered via instant motion. As a genius, Feldway understood instant motion better than most. The ability to ignore both time and space to reposition oneself at will was an absolute strategic advantage, not only for deploying armies on a large scale, but also for executing unpredictable maneuvers in battle. Although Feldway himself had mastered the skill, his naturally cautious nature had prevented him from using it against Diablo. He had always preferred relying on established, foolproof strategies, assigning new abilities to his subordinates for testing until their optimal application had been fully verified. This approach had allowed him to consistently dominate, yet it had also severely hindered his ability to adapt in real time. Yes, Feldway possessed overwhelming power and an innumerable collection of skills, but he lacked the personal experience to improvise in battle. Now, seeing Rimuru wield instant motion with such ease, Feldway felt an unshakable anxiety creeping in. If Rimuru continued to grow at this rate, the situation would soon become irreversible. Even though Rimuru had neutralized Drago Nova, Feldway stubbornly refused to believe that he had done so unscathed. Surely he had suffered serious injuries and was merely putting on a brave front. Operating under this assumption, Feldway decided to take advantage of Milim's momentary release from her stampede state, intending to eliminate the severely weakened Diablo in a single decisive blow before turning his focus on the supposedly wounded Rimuru. However, what he hadn't expected was that the recovery medicine Rimuru had given Diablo would allow the near-broken demon to fully restore himself. Now, reinvigorated, Diablo intercepted Feldway's strike head-on. The instant their weapons clashed, scissors against sword arc, Feldway immediately realized that his plan had failed. Not only had Diablo completely recovered, but he had also abandoned his previous, evasive combat style in favor of a direct, forceful approach. Under normal circumstances, such recklessness would have been suicidal. When power levels were vastly unequal, the weaker party would be crushed outright. Yet Diablo stood his ground effortlessly, showing no signs of struggling. Feldway was stunned. Diablo, on the other hand, simply grinned with an eerie confidence. Just as Feldway suspected, Diablo was using void energy. A chilling dread settled into Feldway's mind. That kind of power was capable of destroying worlds, something that shouldn't be wielded so casually. Yet, unlike earlier, when he had been barely containing it, Diablo's body now completely accepted and circulated the void. Theoretically, summoning this energy from the depths of hell into the physical world was already an incredibly difficult feat. Normally, the negative energy it released would be neutralized by the natural balance of the world, unless one fully opened a gate to the hell abyss, allowing the power to run rampant. Both Diablo and Testarossa undoubtedly had the ability to open such a gate, and if they lost control, it would hardly matter whether the divine tree was destroyed. The entire world would collapse. And yet, instead of allowing the void to consume everything, Diablo had internalized it, circulating the energy within his body as though it were nothing more than a refined technique. He had completely mastered it. Had Diablo's body been gifted by Veldanava-sama, it might have made some sense. But Diablo's current form was merely an assembly of unknown materials. It should not have been able to withstand such a volatile force. Reality, however, defied Feldway's expectations. Diablo had successfully adapted to the void thanks to the universal cells that Rimuru had unknowingly gifted him. These cells, infused with limitless regenerative properties, enabled him to heal faster than the void could erode his body. Originally, Rimuru had simply intended to heal Diablo's injuries. However, Diablo had misunderstood, firmly believing that Rimuru-sama had deliberately provided him with the perfect body for handling the void. It was only because he had seen Zijin's previous battle that Diablo had dared to push himself even further. And yet, he had succeeded. Diablo had completely avoided being consumed by the void. Feldway recognized the immense danger he now posed. Even true dragons, despite their infinite energy, had to carefully manage their reserves. Both Veldrind and Velzard were highly meticulous in calculating their energy consumption during combat. Put simply, depleting an opponent's energy had always been the key to victory among the strongest beings. However, for Diablo, because of his infinite regeneration and void energy forming a perfect loop, he no longer relied on conventional energy reserves. The traditional battle of attrition model no longer applied. Instead, the outcome would be decided purely by power output and combat technique. Feldway struck with the sword arc, slicing into Diablo's shoulder, but the wound instantly regenerated. Even the Genesis-level power of his weapon had failed to leave a lasting effect. It was only then that Feldway truly grasped the severity of the situation. Diablo's skills, raw power, and precision were continuously evolving. Even though Feldway's existence points remained vastly superior, in terms of actual combat prowess, Diablo had surpassed him, and the gap was still growing. Faced with this harsh reality, Feldway was forced to admit that if he did not end this battle immediately, he would inevitably lose. Frustrated, he muttered complaints, even cursing Vega for his incompetence. The fool had failed to seize control of Ramrus's labyrinth, nor had he provided support at this crucial moment. Diablo sneered, informing Feldway that Vega had already been dealt with. He might not be dead, but he was undoubtedly better off that way. Vega, who had survived purely through cowardice and treachery, had always been considered reliable by Feldway. But now, Diablo's very presence was proof of Vega's demise. Feldway had no choice but to accept reality. Of the 3-star admirals, Zelario had betrayed him, Fen had fallen, and it seemed that only Jahil remained. Yet, before he could fully process this, Yuki suddenly appeared, interrupting the moment to announce that he had already killed Jahil. Feldway, enraged, lunged at Yuki, but Yuki effortlessly dodged using instant motion. The cunning strategist smirked, taunting him further, claiming that his mastery of instant motion had been taught to him by Mai Furuki. Diablo, observing this exchange, chuckled darkly, remarking that he had already devised a strategy to counter the technique. Yuki, for his part, had no intention of actually defeating Feldway. His only goal was revenge against the manipulative tyrant who had sought to control him. He understood all too well how terrifying Feldway was. Yet, at the same time, he was even more unsettled by Diablo's overwhelming power, let alone Rimuru's. Meanwhile, Manus Maria continued to shout incessantly, warning Yuki that provoking Diablo or Rimuru was nothing short of suicidal. Yuki had never been more fed up in his life. After Yuki left, Diablo launched his full offensive. Feldway's arc was effortlessly deflected by Diablo's scissors. Watching from the sidelines, Zelario had already realized that he was no match for Diablo. Both he and Leon, witnessing this overwhelming one-sided domination, found Diablo's power difficult to believe. Feldway had previously crushed these mighty warriors without allowing them any chance to retaliate, yet now, he was the one struggling. With End of World Requiem, Diablo struck Feldway down in a single blow. The battle had concluded before Rimuru even needed to intervene. Diablo had ended it alone. Rimuru was both surprised and impressed by Diablo's strength, especially considering that despite his exhaustion, he was still standing. Though drained, he had accomplished an unbelievable feat. Just as Rimuru was about to tell Diablo to rest, he noticed something shocking. Feldway, whom they had assumed to be reduced to dust, had begun regenerating once more. Diablo scowled in disgust, while Rimuru, observing him carefully, noticed that Feldway had fallen into an extreme and miserable emotional state. He muttered incoherent words, filled with confusion, regret, and rage. Confusion as to how he had lost to Diablo, regret that he hadn't destroyed the world sooner, and fury over Veldanava-sama's disappearance. Rimuru hesitated, conflicted over whether he should completely eliminate Feldway, and in that brief moment of mercy, Feldway suddenly locked eyes with him. In those hollow pupils, there was nothing but despair and sorrow. Then, in an instant, he vanished using instant motion, leaving no trace behind. Feldway was too proud to accept his defeat, and Rimuru had never expected him to choose flight over battle. More importantly, he had assumed that even if Feldway attempted to flee, he would be able to track him down. Yet now, everyone was criticizing Rimuru's carelessness, blaming him for allowing Feldway to escape, a mistake that was equivalent to leaving behind a ticking time bomb. Finding Feldway again seemed nearly impossible. Unlike standard teleportation, instant motion did not cause spatial distortions during the jump, only producing a minor disturbance upon arrival, making it incredibly difficult to trace. However, Seo reassured Rimuru that if they could observe the entire central world, they might be able to detect him. Still, Seo also pointed out that based on their current intelligence, Feldway had not returned to the present world. It was highly likely that he had escaped to another dimension. If he ever returned, the fluctuations in the world's magical flow might allow them to track him. Now, it was time for the next phase of battle, and here's a brief breakdown of the tactical assignments. Milim and Veldora proceeded as planned, heading toward the Heaven Tower battlefield to face Ivarage. Accompanying them was Chloe, who could foresee future events. Alongside them, Zelario, Sylvia, and Leon also chose to join the battle. Meanwhile, Elmesia began mobilizing what remained of the Megas, the mechanized magic core, while transporting the entire army became Yuki's responsibility, thanks to his instant motion ability. During this time, Rimuru finalized his agreement with Yuki once more, ensuring their cooperation. He also made a promise to Kigali and her allies: if they emerged victorious, they would be given control over puppet nation Gistav as their new homeland, a land that had originally belonged to Kigali. As for whether victory was assured, Rimuru was honest: he had no absolute confidence. However, if they wanted to save this world, they had no choice but to charge forward with unwavering determination. With this, the forces embarked on their respective missions. It was only after everyone had set out that Rimuru realized he had forgotten to assign Diablo a role. Feeling slightly helpless, he simply took the wounded Diablo along with him, traveling via instant motion to Eurazania to face the next major threat, the true dragon Velzard. At last, let's shift our focus to Ivarage. As Ivarage descended upon the central world, she was delighted to find that many seemed to have gathered just for her arrival. Feeling genuinely overjoyed, she casually launched an attack, and the strongest-looking warrior in the area was unexpectedly left heavily wounded. That warrior had desperately tried to shield some seemingly insignificant weaklings, an action that Ivarage initially could not comprehend. She decided to quietly observe them. As the battle progressed, Ivarage gradually noticed something peculiar: these weak beings were capable of astonishing combat techniques. They seamlessly blended swordsmanship, martial arts, magic, and various abilities into their fighting styles, crafting a spectacle that Ivarage found entirely captivating. With the arrival of Benimaru's reinforcements, the cryptid's army began to lose ground, but rather than frustration, Ivarage felt immense delight. She found everything about this intensely engaging and suddenly felt the urge to personally enter the fray. In that moment, she realized something: perhaps Veldanava, who had abandoned his previous form and chosen to exist in a human-like state, had done so precisely to experience this thrilling art of combat. With that thought, for the first time, Ivarage stepped onto the battlefield herself, touching the earth with her own feet, embracing a form and existence completely different from her past. And as she changed, her three devoted subordinates also underwent significant transformations alongside her. Alright, that's all for this video. For those who have read the novel, you might have noticed that at the end of Volume 22, the author deliberately left a huge mystery regarding Ivarage's true adult form. What exactly does she look like? That's up to your imagination. Perhaps she resembles a certain character in the story, who knows? As for Volume 22 itself, I personally felt that there was a bit too much unnecessary exposition at times. However, if you strip away the filler, you'll see that the author was very deliberate in satisfying fans' expectations, carefully elevating the battle prowess of Diablo, Testarossa, and Carrera as much as possible. And honestly, I think that's fine. After all, TenSura is an isekai fantasy. It should make readers feel excited and entertained. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.